PSSC, the official investigation, found no negligence, and the police further filed the case as no further action. 1 year on, we find that there are some unanswered questions, some open questions that remain to be answered and that have not been addressed by the official investigation. So question 1 is, who allowed and when was a pipeline, the gas pipeline, constructed through a residential area? And this is something that PSSC did not look into. They did not look into the zoning of the pipeline. So based on our searches and as evidence in the policy brief, according to the Rancangan Structure Daerah Petaling Jaya dan Sebahagian Daerah Klang, 1988 to 2010, this Rancangan structure specifically zoned the gas pipeline through both existing and planned future residential developments prior to the inauguration of the pipeline. So for example, if you see X, X is the location of the pipeline rupture, and that color, according to the zone, is zoned for future residential development as of the time that the plan was developed. And this plan was also, there was a public viewing of this plan during the time that the pipeline was being constructed. So the operators should have been well aware of this zoning. Next slide. Question 2, open question, is what is the safety buffer zone and why did it not adequately protect communities? So again, the official investigation did not look into the buffer zones. Based on our findings, Malaysia does not have uniform guidelines on pipeline buffer zones, and that's a huge regulatory gap. According to the ASME B31.8 standard, which is one of the industry standards, international industry standards that Petronas Gas Berhad is supposed to comply to, operators in their risk assessment process is supposed to calculate the potential impact radius of a pipeline to identify, for example, evacuation procedures and other risk management procedures. According to our calculation, the potential impact radius of the pipeline, specifically the part that runs through Putra Heights, is 240 meters. And that's 13 times what the Selangor Menteri Besar stated publicly is PGB's official buffer zone, which is 18.3 meters. So 240 meters potential impact radius and the 18.3 meters minimum buffer zone, according to statements by the Selangor Menteri Besar. And the buffer zone, the pipeline right of way in Putra Heights is calculated to be about 40 meters. So again, 240 meters is a much larger amount than that. Next slide. So question 3 is, why was the community caught off guard? So the PSSC, the official investigation, did not look into any community safety protocols. What we found, and this is based on investigations and interviews conducted by Greenpeace Malaysia with local communities, is that local awareness of the location and the siting of the pipeline, along with appropriate safety protocols, was low. Again, Malaysia does not have uniform requirements on safety protocols for communities near pipelines, and that differs from how other countries like the United States, UK do it. Again, the ASME B31.3 standard, the international standard, requires operators to communicate a range of information to local communities, including specifically how to recognize, report, and respond to a leak, and emergency preparedness. Other pipeline operators that also operate high-pressure gas pipelines through communities, they tend to have information packages on their website identifying very comprehensive emergency preparedness procedures for communities living near pipelines. But based on our checks and based on the documentation that we have, PGB did not appear to have these kind of procedures readily available for communities either before or 1 year after the pipeline. And for example, if we look at the signs that are available along the pipelines, they have some information, but it does not, for example, tell communities how to recognize or respond to a leak and any other emergency preparedness procedures. Next slide. Question 4 is the EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment. So again, the PSSC did not look into whether there was any EIA for either the pipeline or for the Putra Heights residential developments. We do know that the EQA, Environmental Quality Act, EIA order of 1987, came into force 1 year before the construction of the PGU, the Phase 2 pipeline, the part that runs through Putra Heights, commenced. According to this EIA order 1987, the PGU Phase 2 pipeline likely required an EIA, this is based on the technical criteria of the order. And also the UEP Subang Jaya Township, as it was called at that point, also likely required an EIA. So, because the PSSC did not look into this, it remains unclear if either PGB or UEP submitted EIAs for their respective developments. It remains unclear how these EIAs would have considered safety in relation to the pipeline. The PSSC also did not look into whose responsibility it was to monitor the soil subsidence and the eventual rupture of the pipeline. Based on our review of legislation, under the Gas Supply Act 1993, the Energy Commission appears to be responsible for ensuring that the public is protected from dangers related to gas pipelines. Under the Gas Supply Regulations of 1997, as the owner of the pipeline, PGB appears to be responsible for maintaining the facility in good and efficient working order. This is based on our reading of the legislation. Next slide. Further, under the Petroleum Safety Measures, Transportation of Petroleum by Pipelines Regulation of 1985, the Department of Occupational Safety and Health, DOSH, appears to be responsible for ensuring that contractors that had laid the pipeline were compliant with the ASME standards, the ASME B31.8 international standard that we were referring to earlier. And under the Occupational Safety and Health, Control of Industrial Major Accident Hazards, or CIMAH, CHIMA Regulations, 1996, PGB appears to be responsible for complying with the relevant Department of Occupational Safety and Health, or DOSH, regulations. Next slide. So, I mean, a lot of legislation. In conclusion, based on our reading of this legislation, both PGB, Petronas Gas Berhad, and the Energy Commission are likely responsible agencies for monitoring the pipeline. And this is to be done in accordance with the various Petronas technical standards that they have developed for pipeline monitoring and other relevant industry standards. Further, the Energy Commission and local planning authorities have the jurisdiction to inspect the pipeline for safety. And finally, DOSH, Department of Occupational Safety and Health, is supposed to be responsible for ensuring that PGB, Petronas Gas Berhad, was competent in the ASME standards and in relevant DOSH regulations and guidelines. Next slide. Another question is in terms of Petronas' existing technologies. So we know that Petronas utilizes technologies such as INSAR, interferometric synthetic aperture radar, which enables measurements of ground deformations at a global scale every few days and is able to detect deformations up to 2 millimeters, about that big. So the question is, how was a 243 millimeter movement in soil at Putra Heights not detected by any agency, given that this technology exists? This question, I mean, the concerns are raised further because if we look at Sabah and Sarawak, the SSGP, Sabah Sarawak Gas Pipeline, which is also operated by PGB, this experienced 5 publicly known incidents between 2014 and 2022, which also resulted in 1 fatality. So given that this pipeline also experienced monitoring issues on that side, and actually Petronas had closed down sections of that pipeline taking into account public safety measures, how were these safety protocols improved in Peninsular Malaysia, especially since the PGP pipeline on this part goes through major residential areas in Kuala Lumpur? What are we calling for? Number one, the policy brief calls for the establishment of a Royal Commission of Inquiry. This will allow statutory powers to subpoena witnesses, compare the production of documents, and examine evidence under oath. Our call number 2 is to strengthen the Energy Commission as the agency to monitor pipeline safety. And for example, the Energy Commission should establish minimum pipeline safety standards across the board, minimum community protocols across the board, review of pipeline safety across Malaysia, and spearhead the relevant amendments to existing legislation. Next slide. And finally, the sun doesn't need to be transported through the Strait of Hormuz. Because of the issues with fossil gas energy in Malaysia, we call for the improvement of energy security and affordability in Malaysia, especially given that solar energy is already cheaper per megawatt hour than fossil energy. So, for example, we want to call for a phase out of gas power plants by 2050, with a ban on construction of all new coal and gas capacity commencing in 2026, and a target for greater renewables, and for renewables to comprise 100% of the total primary energy supply by 2050. And in practice, also achieving all these things will also mean that there would be no high-pressure gas pipelines operating through densely populated residential communities in Malaysia.